All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started this afternoon. So first of all, again, thank you very much for carving out some time in your day here to join us for this Lunch and Learn. This is our third one that we've done in 2023. And we know that your time is valuable. So I think that what we have here today is a lean program that is going to really hit the high points of this topic that we're going to be discussing, which is procedural justice. We're going to kind of give you the kind of the high level view. We're going to talk a little bit about its benefits, talk a little bit about where the research presently is, and then we're going to talk about how we can, both at a staff level and at an organizational level, how we can begin to sort of implement these things, or at least start to adopt the framework that will allow us to craft our programming that way. So we can go ahead and get started, and I'm one of today's presenters. My name is Dan Robertello, and I'm from the Office of Probation and Correctional Alternatives. I work in the Alternatives to Incarceration Unit with my colleague and co-presenter today, Samantha Hollis. And we also have today our commissioner from Division of Criminal Justice Services, Commissioner Rosanna Rosado, who has given us some of her time and has graciously accepted the opportunity to speak just a little bit about what we're talking about today. So I would be happy to turn it over to Commissioner Rosado if you're available.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you and welcome. I just wanted to welcome everyone. I did sign up for the WebEx because I think it's always great to kind of refresh on the terminology, and then of course they saw my name and said, "Do you want to welcome everyone?" So I want to say thank you for joining us. I think it's really important, and often we don't have time to make time, right, to do this learning, and I think it's really important and admirable that you take time to do this work. I know some of you are probably not learning this for the first time, but it's really a refresher. And also, we're living in different times, and so we need to adjust in the way that we are delivering services and in the way that we are bringing people to the table. So it's really important to go over kind of the genesis of that. This year, as you know, in the budget that's being battled across the street right now, we stand to gain for the first time important dollars for this work, this work that we do in ATI and this whole area of the industry, if you will, has not received any additional funding for over a decade. And so as we embark on the important work and get the money to do it, I think it's important to remind ourselves through this training and review why we make these important changes and why procedural justice is important to all of the folks in all of you who are working on this, but also the communities, and I think it will help as we determine where to invest those dollars. It will help the whole. And at the end of the day, everyone wants to stay safe and go home at the end of the day. And also, in my view, my passion is about for whatever reason people wind up in the justice system and the mistakes they make in life. In my view, we continue to work to make people whole after they've paid their debt, after they've gone through what they've gone through, after they've been affected by other people's decisions. We work as an agency and as New Yorkers to make people whole. So thank you for having me, and I will let you get started.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. And that really does set the stage pretty perfectly for where we're about to go. You mentioned making things whole, and I think that this framework really does allow us to do those things, to kind of create and close a circle of services and the things that we provide to our community. So thanks again. Before we get into the thick of it, just really quick, we'd like to just get a sense for who's in the room. We got close to 70 people here, so if you wouldn't mind just dropping in the chat, if you're able to, just who you are and where you come to us from, so we can just sort of see where everyone is at. All right, already starting to see a perfect mix of community agencies, probation departments. Excellent, excellent. So we have a pretty diverse group of professionals here. as we're seeing, like I said, we have folks that are representing our probation departments throughout the state. We have folks that are representing, little, I wouldn't say little, but smaller, more specific slices of the pie. Folks that are working in task programs and alcohol and drug programs, folks that are working in pretrial programs and so forth. So it's really good to have everybody here, because this is one of those topics that it really does require as much as possible an all hands on deck sort of mentality. Let's go ahead and look at the learning objectives if we can. And so this is what we're hoping to do in the next 50 minutes. And we're also going to have some time for questions and thoughts and experiences and that sort of thing toward the end. But what we're hoping to do at the core and at the minimum here is to give you a working definition for procedural justice and specifically look at the 4 pillars that comprise this model. We want to kind of look at the emerging field of research, because that's sort of where we're at with this topic. It's sort of one that's been around for a while, but it's one that is still sort of emerging. And so we want to provide you with the bits of research that we found to be valuable and in support of this type of a model, and look at the benefits that it can also provide. And then finally, at the end of this, you might feel really motivated to act, and that's amazing. And so, we want to leave you with some thoughts and some ideas as to how we as individual staff members working with our populations, and how organizations that support our staff, that support the people that we work with, how they can start to adopt those things as well. So that is what we're hoping to do this afternoon. So as I said, this is a topic, a field that has been kicked around for a while. You can go back and, find this term, in the late 80s and early 90s, but it hasn't necessarily been something that has been broadly applied to our field. To date, it seems mostly concentrated in law enforcement. And so what we're hoping to do, particularly in our office and the role that we have in alternatives to incarceration, is broadening the application and broadening these concepts to work for probation departments, to work for alternatives to incarceration programs, for reentry task forces, and so forth. So again, we're kind of trying to give you just a high-level sort of view here. So again, if you're able to, we would love to know, and it's okay that you don't, if you don't, what you know of procedural justice. Before we put the definition up there, are there any words, ideas, phrases, concepts that seem to, that kind of come to your mind when this topic comes up? Okay, we have someone said innocent until proven guilty. Okay, that's sort of, we're moving that direction, sure. That gets us into the ballpark. Understanding, absolutely. Yeah, you don't have to unmute yourselves or come on camera or anything like that. Fairness, yep. Due process, transparency, perfect. Honesty, yep, perfect. So let's actually put the definition up there if we can. So I wanted to throw this out there before I read this to y'all and before y'all read it, that there are, several groups, research groups, think tanks, agencies, and so forth that have their own sort of tweaks to this definition. But what I want to sort of impress on you is that no matter where you find this definition, you're going to, and no matter the differences, you're going to find the spirit of procedural justice, and is going to speak to all the things that you folks put in the chat. So procedural justice focuses on the way courts, police, and other legal authorities, which we will include our ATI families, our CRTF families, and how authorities interact with the public, and how the characteristics of those interactions shape the public's view of those entities, their willingness to obey the law, and actual crime rates. So that's a whole lot. So it doesn't provide a whole lot of direction, but it does start to sort of flesh out the roadmap here. And so that's why we want to, identify procedural justice in this conversation as a framework, right? Because it's more fleshed out than a theory, right? It has a little bit more teeth than just a thought and an idea, but it doesn't yet have the very specific evidence-based, research-tied strategies and tactics that are specifically kind of found under this umbrella. So, you know, sort of using the bones here, so to speak, this is sort of the spirit of procedural justice. And it sort of rests on this idea that individuals will be more accepting of an outcome, no matter what the outcome is, if they feel as though they've been treated fairly, right? So it sort of eliminates the stock response of, you know, parents and so forth, of the "it is what it is" sort of thing. It sort of takes the "it is what it is" mentality and that phrase and sort of throws it out the window in favor of being more specific and being more transparent in the actions that we are taking. Can you go to the next slide, please? And so just another one of the resources, and please, after this is over, if you want to contact myself or any of my colleagues, you know, we do have the research that we pulled this stuff from, articles and such, if you wanted to go into it further. And one of them that we found pretty valuable was work done out of Yale Law School. And so what this really focuses on, so look on the side there, the goal is legitimacy and the tactic is procedural justice. And so when we talk about legitimacy, it means how much the public buys into what we do. How much do they really believe that we are, you know, acting fairly, acting justly, acting without bias, and so forth. So that's what we mean when we're talking about legitimacy. And so it stands to reason that if a person views the sort of authority, you know, whoever it might be in this case, as being more legitimate, as being more fair, as being having a greater capacity to understand, it stands to reason that that will likely improve that individual's performance. Is it a 100%, you know, slam dunk? Nothing is. But will this give you a great shot? It absolutely will. And so when you take it even further than that, you see the next domino fall. Not only is it going to improve compliance for the individual, but it can be very powerful at reducing crime across the board. You know, when we look at sort of the kind of main conflicts or issues facing our field today, it really does come down to, you know, frankly, legitimacy in a lot of ways. You know, does the public believe that the justice system actors are acting in such a way that is, you know, uniform and just? That's sort of the big picture. So it does have the opportunity or the potential to really have make an impact on crime rates and compliance. Go to the next slide. And so we're going to take a look at the 4 pillars of procedural justice. So I'm hoping that you know, some of the things that you take away today or that you're going to remember are going to be these 4 pillars here. And so we'll get into them individually in the coming slides. But what we're looking at here is neutrality, voice, respect, and trustworthiness. Now, again, we have historically seen this model applied to law enforcement agencies more so than community corrections agencies. But when you really look at these basic tenets, you see that these are applicable across any part of the system that you happen to work in. And you can even look at it in the way that it transcends criminal justice altogether, because wouldn't these be things that you would expect, say, from your healthcare provider? Right? Are these sort of the things that you would expect in a professional setting? These are the things that we might expect in education settings, right? So, you know, it does have application across multiple domains if you kind of look at it in that way. So the first pillar that we're going to look at here is neutrality. It's pretty simple. The decisions are unbiased and guided by transparent reasoning. And we do this in the effort to build equity, legitimacy, and trust. This takes the form of giving consistent responses, providing similar opportunities to individuals. Next slide, please. And so whether or not our clients succeed, it's important that they have, that they're receiving consistent treatment from us as providers, that despite the circumstance that they might find themselves in, it's important that we're demonstrating balance and that we're demonstrating an even keel and providing that person, as I said, with a consistent type of treatment when they're with us. We also want to make sure that people have equal access and opportunity to programs. I'll kind of just put a little caveat in there that obviously we don't want to prescribe programming that doesn't fit for a person. And so if that circumstance comes up, that individual probably would benefit from some discussion or explanation as to why that particular part of the programming package may not be totally suitable for them. And third, something that comes up a lot as suggested in the race and equity work that we do is removing identifying information from decision-making situations. So that would mean removing race, sexual orientation, gender, name, age, anything that could identify a person by anything other than the actions that are before you. Kind of gives you another opportunity to ensure that there is limited or no bias of any kind influencing that decision making. The next slide. The second pillar we have is voice, and this is all about people telling you how they feel, and that can be super uncomfortable. But we have really good scientific evidence that that tells us very clearly that the act of a human being putting unwanted feelings into words will reduce the strength of the emotion. Right? I mean, I think that's super relatable. That's something that we can all probably think back in our experiences and say that we've probably had before. This is about being heard, and this is about being received. It's the idea that whether or not the decision that you make is what the person wants, you have given them the opportunity to state their side, state their case honestly. And that, as I said, in and of itself, reduces the sort of strength of those really difficult emotions. And so what does that actually look like in practice? Again, these are ideas. We don't have all the answers, and we don't have all the ideas. So these are just some thoughts to provide to y'all that you might want to think about as you go back to your offices. So voice in action. So this is intentionally creating space for client expressions. This requires intentionality. This really requires, the time, creating that space, holding space for people so that they can feel safe and validated in their expression. It's also about honing our own listening skills, right? So like, what good is it if a person's concerns fall on deaf ears, or if they get the impression that they have fallen on deaf ears? So, making sure that we're staying very sharp with the way that we are receiving and capturing information can be really beneficial. And then finally, I know a lot of agencies do this, but I don't know how widespread it is, but making sure that there's periodic satisfaction surveys, feedback channels, making sure that clients are aware that there are ways to make their voices heard in a way that is safe and secure, and in a way that doesn't, that they don't have to fear retaliation. So if it's kind of part and parcel with your programming, you might get some more honest feedback as to what the satisfaction level is of the people that you're working with. The third pillar is respect. Respect is sort of a difficult thing to define and a difficult thing to point to and say there's an example of it. But I think that this really just comes down to acknowledging the basic humanity of every individual that's before you, and in that expression of respect and humanity, that sort of breeds equality and acceptance, or it starts to set the stage for equality and acceptance between yourself and the individual. And so what does respect look like in action? Providing information in complete ways and empathetic ways. It's really difficult to have hard conversations, to tell a person that, you're on the cusp of changing their lives in whatever way that it is. I think we have a tendency to not want to bring harm to others, so we might sugarcoat or dance around, which really only benefits us. And so kind of learning to be comfortable with presenting that information in those empathetic ways, in those complete ways, I think works a long way towards the ultimate decision acceptance. Secondly, creating an equitable atmosphere. So that could be in a program, in the one-on-one relationship you share with the individual. Again, that's how do you do that? It's more of a feeling. How do you make sure that somebody feels as though they're on equal footing? How do you make sure that a person feels valid in the concerns or whatever it is that they're bringing to you? And then finally, really making that effort to be approachable and encouraging. We can fixate, and we tend to fixate on parts of people's lives where they're in deficit, where they're lacking, but really trying to emphasize the wins and really trying to emphasize even the presence of change talk. I would really like to change blah blah. That's something to be celebrated. In many cases, that's not a celebration that individuals have felt in their lives. That isn't something that they have really felt from people in these positions. So approachable and encouraging. And then finally, we have the fourth pillar, which is trustworthiness. Now, this is one that you might see referred to a bit differently in other places. We see it as understanding, and a few other ways of phrasing it, but it really does come down to the same again set of points here. So decision makers convey trustworthy motives and concern about the well-being of those impacted by their decisions. This is a really good place to just sort of stop and talk about authority and talk about power briefly. I'll just kind of go off script. Doing these things, engendering trust with an individual, demonstrating respect to an individual, making sure that a person feels like they're being heard, does not skew the balance of authority or the balance of power in your relationships. I know that that's a very tricky thing to sort of work with sometimes. Maybe it's sort of an old school mentality where people might perceive this type of work as being, or the type of way of working as maybe being ineffective for not being so hard. But the fact remains, and particularly for those of you that carry badges, and for those of you that might even carry weapons, no matter if you are respectful to a person, or you give them the opportunity to speak, or you engender trust with them, you still have all the authority. So this is really about seeing the opportunity to do things in a way that brings about the most complete conclusion. We can go to the next slide. And so what this actually looks like: trustworthiness, honoring the responsibilities to our clients. I've been guilty in my former career of saying, hey, meet me at this time. Hey, I'll make this phone call for you. Hey, I'll drop this email for you. And when you don't, that's huge. It's crushing. So honoring our responsibilities to the extent that we can, to the extent appropriate with our clients, is certainly something that engenders that. Taking extra time to check for understanding, not necessarily assuming that everything that we say, especially things that come from courts and from legal authorities, that the folks we work with understand them. I mean, some of the time I don't understand the stuff that comes across my desk, and I have to get a second set of eyes on it. So making sure that folks are understanding what's before them does sort of level that playing field in terms of the trust. And finally, explaining why. This is something that folks can struggle with, because I think that historically and inherently in the positions that we have, we are conditioned to say, well, I don't have to tell you why. Why doesn't matter. I don't have to tell you why. This is just the way that it is. And when we go back and we kind of think about those experiences, and again, I'll self-reflect. And I've been in those positions, and I've been asked to, well, why is this happening to me, Dan? And I say, well, listen, man, I don't have to tell you that. That was more for me to get out of an uncomfortable situation. Had I taken the time to explain the why, I could guarantee that both that individual and myself, I mean, like, I'm talking about this like almost 10 years later, I still remember those kinds of things, and like, I'm sure that they do too. So, taking that extra time to just explain, this is what's happening in your life, is so worth it. It's just so worth it. And I think that might conclude my portion, and I think that'll go to Samantha next. Sam?
Thanks, Dan. All right, next up, we're going to look at the procedural justice research and benefits. And as Dan mentioned, there's not much research on this, specifically in the community corrections field. So we're not going to focus too much on research, but we wanted to bring, a few pieces in there. And then we're really going to focus more on the benefits. What does utilizing and implementing these 4 pillars of procedural justice in the line of work that you do, how is that going to benefit you and benefit the client? And really what we believe and what the focus of this is building that rapport, building that effective communication in the relationship between you and the individual. And there are simple ways to tweak the way we do our work day to day that will kind of harbor that. So we're going to focus right now on the research. Using the procedural justice framework encourages decision acceptance. And I think this is kind of what John had asked a question about earlier. If you instill those 4 pillars in an individual when you're working with them, simply explaining the why, like Dan said, outlining what their requirements are, what your responsibilities are, you're going to encourage decision acceptance on that individual. Why? Because they know that you're being transparent with them. You're being open with them. You're being honest with them. And they don't have to wonder whether you're going to pull one over on them or violate them out of nowhere. So that's why we really hope that making these small shifts, you'll start to see a little bit more of the decision acceptance in your clients. Tone of voice and respectful terms of address. So clients have reported improved experiences when these factors are considered. And we're going to have a little example later of how our tone and our voice really kind of plays a big role in the interactions we have with individuals. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. Higher level of satisfaction with trained workers. So an improved user experience from workers trained in a procedural justice model versus those that have not. So there is research that when they did training for procedural justice, they implemented certain pieces that they were going to have those individuals do with their clients, and there was increased satisfaction using surveys like Dan mentioned to kind of gauge whether this was landing. And explaining actions and decisions, explaining the reasoning behind decisions brought about the most significant improvement in reported user experiences. Does anyone want to throw in the chat why they think that might be? That simply explaining the reasoning behind a decision you might be making with a client or a supervisee brought about the most significant improvement in the client reaction and decision acceptance. You can throw it in the chat. I'll give you a minute. And I like to think about all of this in the terms of, how I would like to be treated if I were ever on probation or parole or anything in the criminal justice system. All right, so I got some knowing the why. They feel respected. Yes, Dan said exactly right. Danina, because it makes the clients feel included and respected. And I mean, do you guys think that's something simple that you could be doing in your everyday interaction with your clients? You're not telling what to do. Getting a lot here. Thank you guys. You're not telling what to do. It's an effort between you and the client. Exactly. Inclusion. Great, Felix. Joe, people appreciate and need as much information about what's going on, just like when you see a doctor. Yes. Like if I was going to the doctor and I was having some issues, health issues, and they just said, yeah, you'll see it in your patient portal. I'm not going to explain any of it to you. That would create a lot of anxiety, a lot of angst, and a lot of confusion. So that's kind of what we're getting at here. Same thing, like Dan said, it can be transpired across the board. Using common language and explaining legal terms. Yeah, legal terms are difficult. I know we at the state, we use a lot of abbreviations, and I do it with my fiance, and he's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. So just explaining the legal language. That's why a lot of individuals are lawyers, because it's really difficult to decipher. By having things explained, they can make a more informed decision. Absolutely. The doctor example lands the hardest, Dan. Yeah. It may allow them to open up to you as well as far as the reasons for their choices. Yes, Frank Cangiano, I love that. Oftentimes we just think, hey, they committed a crime. That's it. There's no real reason behind it. But we know that's typically not the case. Show them they also have the power to make a decision. Yeah, empowering individuals when like Dan mentioned, sometimes they've never been empowered to make their own decisions, can really make or break how that interaction is going to go moving forward. Many of those we serve already feel just pushed around. Yes. How many individuals had they encountered in the criminal justice system and it was, okay, go talk to the next person. I already gathered this information from you, but they're going to want to gather it from you too. So there's a lot of just like moving them through and no genuine understanding of why, in fact, they're here or they've made a decision that landed them here. It's helpful to show you are human too. Yeah, we talk a lot about humanity in the work we're doing. And I think it's important to bring that to the forefront that we are working with humans. We are humans working with humans. And I just kind of want to reinstill that, just do unto others as you'd like done to yourself. The system is feeling as though they some agency in the decisions about their lives. It allows the opportunity for the client to understand your responsibility in the relationship. Yeah. And I think this goes back to what Dan had mentioned, that this implementing the pillars of procedural justice and the framework of procedural justice does not take away your authority as the individual in this relationship, right? You still have the authority here, but they also want to know what your responsibility is to them and what their responsibility is to you. All right, great interaction, guys. Thank you so much. So the benefits of procedural justice: increased likelihood of compliance, encourages the decision acceptance again, like we mentioned, and supports approaches that promote community involvement and helps to build alternatives to adjudication. So it's hard to say for sure what the benefits of procedural justice will be, as a lot of pilot programs seem to still be testing things out, as we noted. That said, we should put that caveat out there that some of these benefits or expected benefits are aspirational to a degree. You know, again, the research is not there yet. We hope that with more funding that we will continue to do research on that, and maybe something that we look forward to at DCJS. But, you know, these are aspirational, and we've seen them in the line of work of just using techniques such as motivational interviewing, interactive journaling, using those cognitive behavioral interventions. So they're all kind of tied together. All right, we wanted to include this, and we took this from our friends at the Office of Public Safety here at DCJS, but I think it's a really good picture to kind of show how actions lead to perceptions, lead to outcomes. So here we're looking at the benefits of procedural justice, the officer's actions, or, you know, you as an individual, you don't have to be an officer, so that's interchangeable here, follows procedural justice principles and addresses the needs of victims or their clients. The citizens' perceptions based on that are that the officer or their case manager, whoever, is respectful, they're fair, they were listened to, that the officer or individual listened to them, the individual cares about their well-being, and then they're satisfied with the encounter because of those pieces. They now trust that individual, and they trust either the police department, the parole department, probation department. So it all kind of falls in line with those 4 pillars. And then the expected outcomes, when you kind of put together the actions and the perceptions, are that you would increase officer safety, increase compliance with requests, increase investigative information, reduce the complaints you may get from those on your caseload, and increase job satisfaction. So I want to kind of focus on that for a moment, because I think this is a field that burnout can be very prevalent, right? We're constantly seeing different individuals in really hard situations, individuals that have trauma that we're now hearing about or taking on. And so when you have more meaningful conversations and relationships with those on your caseload, hopefully that will increase your job satisfaction by not feeling that burnout, just kind of running the rat wheel and kind of just going through the motions with no real positive outcomes. Because like Dan said, regardless of whether they successfully complete your program, successfully complete the treatment you've assigned them to, you know, we can still instill good relationships with them and increase our job satisfaction. All right, applying the framework, organizational and staff level. So we're going to kind of look at how, if you're the top of the organization, or you're looking to kind of talk to your organization about this, how you can apply this framework in sort of I don't want to say easier ways, but a little bit more manageable and tangible ways. And then of course at the staff level. So applying procedural justice. Operationalizing procedural justice remains a challenge and an opportunity. As we noted, there's not a lot of research here, but there are a lot of opportunities to use this in everyday interactions. Procedural justice must be embraced by the organization as a whole. Dan and I feel very strongly about this, and DCJS, that everything comes from the top, right? So if the top doesn't embrace procedural justice, it's less likely that maybe the line staff may also want to accept procedural justice. So really kind of talking about this at your organizational level as a whole, and then moving down the line. Implementation of procedural justice practices must be collaborative. So again, same thing. Upper management should be working with staff and kind of collaborating on how they can implement this into their program. Operational procedural justice items could include pre and post enrollment, anonymous surveys like we mentioned earlier, using people first language such as removing offender or other applied titles in written and verbal correspondence, reference cards for workers. So there's some, you can use a reference card to say, do this when you're working with an individual, think more about these, just kind of like a little reminder that someone can have. Organizational engagement efforts, leadership and direct staff, and our commitment document plainly states what the program will offer to the individual and the way they can expect to be treated. And then clearly stating the reasons for decision making. Again, we talked about that transparency, a statistically significant factor in improving participant perceptions. Applying the framework at the leadership level. So we're going to want to promote the message and garner staff buy-in. Arrange for assessments, evaluations, consultations, and training for the program. Ongoing training is always a good tool to have, hone your skills. So arranging for those and allowing your staff to take those is the way you cultivate applying the framework. Maintaining updated practices and procedures that incorporate the procedural justice principles. A handbook, our commitment, like I mentioned previously, and an active role in tracking fidelity or program satisfaction. So these points underscore the challenge of operationalizing procedural justice. Some things can be enacted quickly and with low investment, such as updating those documents, while others are more abstract, messaging and buy-in, and require long-term planning, which is that tracking the fidelity. So we wanted to give you some pieces that can easily be implemented, such as, changing some policies and procedures. And then, of course, long-term tracking that fidelity and getting a training plan in motion. Applying the elements at the staff level. So the professional development, again, very important, trainings, webinars, lunch and learns, policies and procedures for staff supervisee relations. So not only a policy and procedure for your staff working for your organization, but also one for how they're going to interact with their clients. Utilizing people first language, as I noted before, for example, supervisee rather than offender. We at DCJS have changed a lot of our language to not utilize offender. We took it out of offender workforce development specialist, and we focus primarily on justice involved individuals. Being mindful of verbal and nonverbal communication. I think that's one of the most important pieces of communication. Sometimes we only think of it as verbal, but there's the other side, right? Our tone, the way we present our body language, gives off a lot of clues on whether we're actively listening, whether we're engaged, whether we're interested, and, the clients will feel that. All right, so this is that little diagram I wanted to talk about that I mentioned earlier. So voice breakdown. So interesting to see that under stress, nonverbal communication becomes dominant. Verbal communication accounts for only 7% of information communicated to clients. Tone and volume account for 38% of that information communicated, and body language accounts for 55%. Is anyone surprised by these figures? You could throw it in the chat. What kind of sticks out to you? I know for me, to see that body language accounts for 55% of how I portray information to an individual is very high. I did not expect to see that 55% number. All right, Nicole says actions speak louder than words. Yeah. And Rhiannon says, I learn the most from body language. Yeah, someone could, if I'm crossing my arms or, I'm focusing on my cell phone, I'm not interested. And there may be a reason behind that. Body language is emphasized in T4C active listening. Yes, active listening is a big proponent, and body language is definitely one. John says, no, when a large part of the population has to be able to learn to read the room in early childhood is a big factor. And Joe says, makes me curious of the impact of virtual meetings. Yeah, and you could probably see me using my hands because that's just how I am. But yeah, through COVID, we had to shift right into virtual meetings, virtual trainings. And then I just did one recently in person with my colleague, Michelle Clark. We did a 2-day facilitator training for interactive journaling, and it was a world of difference. Just being involved, being in that room, big difference. Amy says facial micro expressions clue you into how someone is actually feeling. Yeah, I know a lot of people say I don't have a poker face. So sometimes in meetings, my face may say what I'm not saying. All right, let's move on here. All right, again, similar chart to what we talked about before. This is applying the elements at the staff level. So we're going to look at the supervisor actions, the officer perceptions, and then the expected outcomes. So the supervisor's actions follows procedural justice principles, addresses the needs of the officer. I think this is very important. We're talking about this primarily in the relationship between the client and the staff. However, this can also be implemented in your structure of your program. So how the supervisor works with the staff. The officer or staff level's perceptions are that their supervisor is respectful, their supervisor is fair, they were listened to, cares about their well-being, and thus they're satisfied with the encounter, whether that be maybe counseling or just a one-on-one check-in, whatever the formality, or just an informal conversation. I trust the supervisor, very important here, and I trust my department. So this says police department, but obviously that would be your department. And then the expected outcomes are that increased productivity, increased compliance with requests, better relationships and less stress, very important. Reduced citizen complaints, self-regulation, and again, increasing that overall job satisfaction. So these are just some ways that you can visualize kind of implementing this into your organization. All right, we have a short video here. Hopefully it plays. And this is a video that's just kind of going to pull everything together that we've talked about today. This is from the Center for Justice Innovation. It's approximately 2 minutes and 55 seconds. And it's really just going to kind of wrap up everything that we talked about today before we move into kind of Q&A and any comments, questions.
And when you shared your screen, is there a share audio little checkbox by any chance?
No, people are saying audio is poor, but it's up all the way for me.
Well, when you
Let's see.
shared the content, there's a share computer audio box to check.
That didn't pop up for me. Probably
weird.
because of the way I shared it. But you know what? Let me do something. I'll get out of here and I'll show the video via See if I could do it this way. Bear with me. Aspen Dental. Okay, let me see. Oh, there it is. Share computer audio.
There you go. And then you
Okay.
may have to mute your line so it doesn't come through your speaker.
Okay, let's try this again. Thank you, guys.
Okay. Yeah, no problem.
All right.
Tens of thousands of people come through our justice system each day, whether it's traffic court, housing court, or criminal court. These places can seem like factories processing cases and people like widgets. But what if these courts took a different approach? What if they focused on making each court appearance a positive one that built trust rather than eroded it? Research has documented that how people are treated is important, even more important than the outcome of their case. This idea is called procedural justice. Procedural justice has been tested in a variety of contexts, from police stops to courtrooms to prisons. In all of these settings, agencies that improve perceptions of fairness also improved public trust and voluntary compliance with the law. There are 4 primary elements of procedural justice. First, feeling like you understand your legal rights and procedures. Here's a handout about some new park rules. You can read more on our website. Second, neutrality. Feeling that the process is transparent and applied the same way regardless of age, gender, race, or other factors. Absolutely no liquids. Throw them out, folks. Third, voice, or perceiving that you had the opportunity to tell your side of the story. I understand your frustration. Please explain to me what happened and I'll try to help. And fourth, respect. Feeling treated with dignity and that your rights were respected. Good morning. Thank you in advance for helping us give each case the time and attention it needs. Mr. Smith, I apologize for the wait time this morning. Let's get started. Some would call all of this basic common sense, but it's also supported by research. When justice system professionals deliver these 4 key elements, they generate public trust. Not only that, but people are then more likely to obey the law. Perhaps counterintuitively, procedural justice works even when there's a bad outcome, like a traffic ticket or an unfavorable criminal sentence. Studies show, true, most people like to win. Outcomes matter. But what matters more than the outcome is people feeling like the process is fair. That's procedural justice. Now, most professionals are good at this most of the time, but lots can get in the way. Procedural justice isn't the solution to all of the problems our justice system faces, but it is a relatively easy and low-cost approach that can pay significant dividends and improve public trust and public safety. To learn more and for additional resources, please visit Court Innovation.
All right. So if you guys want to pop in the chat, any thoughts you had about that video, I think it kind of just, again, was a culmination of everything Dan and I shared here, and then some good examples with each of the pillars on how it works in the system. Thank you guys for bearing with me on that. And I do see John asks, I have coworkers asking if you would please send me a copy. Yes, we will send a copy out, and this recording will be put on our website. I believe we're on our YouTube channel. And Dan notes the video would be a good tool for introducing this topic to colleagues. Yeah, absolutely. Joe says, It is good to see the DCGS emphasis on people skills. The ability to establish honest and genuine engagement with the people we help is in the most cases, along with requisite overall skill set competency, the make or break issue determining a successful outcome. Yes, Joe, I agree. People remember how you made them feel. Yeah, they forget what you say, they forget what you did, but they always remember how you made them feel. Yeah, we share that. We share that quote with our empathy piece in motivational interviewing. All right, so a takeaway from today, we wanted to just kind of pose this question to you guys, and you don't have to answer. You can take this with you and think about it, but what can you take away from this class that may benefit you in becoming a more effective either peace officer, ATI, CRTF, EFS staff member, and or just an overall person? And please feel free to throw it in the chat if you wish, but you don't have to. We're just asking you to kind of like take this away and think about it as you leave us today. John says, seems like basic common courtesy is what is being called for. Yeah, I believe that this should be the standard for all human services that are offered. Wouldn't that be great? If we can continue getting this message out there and, relating it to every single piece of every single system, I think, we could get there. Makes sense to me and hope more supervisors support PJ. Yeah, it would be great. Instead of world peace, I'll say more humanity in our services, right? If I was a beauty queen. Anybody have anything else they would like to share or any comments? Please feel to raise your hand and we will unmute you. I know we are getting to the time frame here, but we definitely wanted to open it up if anybody had any comments or questions. All right, let me see. John has his hand up. Let me see if I can find you to unmute you. I'm not sure if you can unmute yourself, but if you can, go ahead, John.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. So I do some of the interactive journaling classes with participants now.
Awesome.
And what I found interesting is the people that are completing 2 and 3 year periods of incarceration, I kind of get it. They kind of believe that procedural justice and restorative justice is the hallmark of the day. They say, I could talk to my parole officer. I believe that it's not their job to reoffend me or violate me. It's their job to help me. Some of the newer guys get that. When I get someone who is coming out from a 16-year stretch, from a 12-year stretch, and we talk in group and guys talk about trusting their parole officer, some of these older guys are like, what are you talking about? No, you never want to tell them that. That's going to put you, no, when? And so those are the people that I really have to work with through my own actions to help them develop trust, to help them realize that, yeah, no, I'm not going to argue with you. That, I'm not going to name parole officers and probation officers that I know that, they would say, I'm going to the house specifically looking under rocks to get this guy. That has changed. I could now talk about parole officers that I know are working at the level of social workers to help our guys access the resources to stay in the community. And that's something that is, and what I wanted to say is that that's something it takes time. I have one guy, it's taken him probably 3 months of meeting with me twice a week to get to the point where if something's not working right, he feels comfortable and safe sharing it with me. And I tell him, I can't blame you. Given what you've experienced, even outside of the justice system, trust is a big thing for you. It's going to take time. So this isn't going to work overnight. And that's something I hope people understand, that it's going to take time.
Yes, great points. We talk a lot about that in interactive journaling, that and motivational interviewing. I'm trained in both and I deliver both. And this is practice, right? Every interaction you have with that client is a new time to practice, another opportunity to build that rapport, another opportunity to try to work to gain their trust. And you're absolutely right, John. It will not happen overnight. It will happen quicker for others than it will for the next person. And that's okay, because as long as we're consistent, eventually, hopefully we'll break through to that individual and they'll be able to trust us. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Jackie noted humans deserve respect and compassionate interactions. Absolutely. All right. Well, if no one has anything else, if you do, please feel free to throw it in the chat or raise your hand and you can unmute yourselves. But if not, we want to thank you for taking your lunch. I know that, you know, we want to be respectful that this is your time away from the work you do, and we hope that this was valuable for you. So thank you again on behalf of Dan and I for taking the time during your break time, and we truly appreciate it. And I'll put up our contact information. Yeah. Vincent, when are the next interactive journaling classes? We just finished one. You know, we're working on training plans, so hopefully something will come out soon.
Thank you both to Dan and Sam. Really phenomenal job. Just a reminder, we'll be sending out the PowerPoint and the recording to everyone that is here today, as well as those that weren't able to join us. And as Sam mentioned, this will be on the website as well as the IJ portal. Thank you all so much.